Welcome to Star Wars Characters Explained. In my last video, I covered the masked menace Darth Nihilus, the Lord of Hunger, but in today's video, I'm going to be covering his bane and nemesis, the Jedi Exile, Meetra Surik. I'm going to start by giving you a rundown of Meetra's abilities and powers, so you can understand her a little more before we go into her life story. Meetra's most unusual ability was her skill in influencing others, and the way she formed force bonds with the people around her. And this was actually an ability she had no knowledge of. It was sort of a natural reaction. When she reconnected to the Force during the Dark Wars, this ability became stronger. It was so powerful, it was able to convince people to do almost anything, to the point where they would even go against their own morals. Also unknown to her was her adept ability in Force Drain, using the death of others to strengthen her own Force energy. This ability was a response to being a wound in the Force. Under Krea's tutelage, she could read people's innermost thoughts, and she was extremely proficient in defensive abilities such as Force Valor, Force Resistance, and the extremely rare but powerful ability known as Force Enlightenment. She could almost instantly learn lightsaber and Force techniques, and was also one of the very few Jedi that had managed to learn and master the combat form Dun Mok. Her skills as a tactician were also pretty much unrivaled. Only Revan truly bested her as a tactical mind. This allowed her to become one of the great Jedi generals during the Mandalorian Wars. She commanded over half of the Republic's forces by the end of it. I'm now going to move on to her life story, mainly her history and her ultimate demise. Meetra Surik was at a young age like many others when the Jedi Order took her away from her family. She was taken to the Enclave on Dantooine and was taken as a Padawan unofficially by the Jedi Knight Kotor. Kotor, however, left to fight against the growing Mandalorian threat, and from there on, she had many different trainers throughout her early years, including Vima Sunrider and Zez Ka'el. Her official master, though, was never identified. Meetra trained at Dantooine for the majority of her years, and she was known even at an early age to be powerful. But the Jedi Masters who trained her were very cautious, because she had a strange aptitude for severing Force connections and forming bonds. Meetra was an extremely compassionate but proud Jedi, and at the beginning of the Mandalorian Wars, she was devastated when she learned about the amount of lives that were lost in the Outer Rim. Inspired by her former master Kotor, who had fought in the early skirmishes against the Mandalorians, she decided to join Jedi Knight Revan, who had convinced many Jedi to betray the Order's wishes to help the Republic face the Mandalorian threat. She was recruited personally by Revan's second-in-command, Alec, who would go on to become the Sith Lord Darth Malak. Meetra also left behind a young boy who she was set to take on as her apprentice. This boy was Mikkel, who she is reunited with and unknowingly befriends during the Dark Wars. During the Mandalorian Wars, Meetra became one of Revan's most trusted friends and generals, and she was at the forefront of some of the war's most bloodiest battles, including the Battle of Duxon. It was during these battles that Revan had noticed her skills as a warrior and her tactical leadership as a general. In this time, Meetra had become ruthless and cold, just like Revan, and her final act in the war would be the most devastating. In the final battle, both Republic and Mandalorians fought a massive naval battle above Malachor 5, with some forces fighting on the ground. Revan had managed to push the remaining Mandalorian forces towards the planet after defeating their leader, and Meetra made the decision to activate the mass shadow generator in order to wipe out the Mandalorian forces once and for all. Everything in close orbit and on the planet was crushed and destroyed by the planet's gravity, and the decision was made regardless of how many of her own forces it would eventually kill. This included countless amounts of people that Meetra had befriended and led as commander during the war, and she felt this in a way that nobody else could. The planet had become a very wound in the Force, a place of death, and Meetra felt every single one. She could hear the endless screams through the Force, and this in turn created a wound in the Force inside her. This wound would have eventually killed her. She would have been consumed by her actions, and to save herself from this fate, she subconsciously cut her own connection to the Force. In the aftermath of the war, the surviving Jedi under Revan had all turned to the dark side, save one. Meetra was the only Jedi who returned to the Jedi Council on Coruscant to face punishment. This was because she could no longer feel the Force, and thus she couldn't feel the lure of the dark side as the other Jedi could. She tried to convince the Council that her actions were for the good of the Republic, but the Jedi Masters decreed that following Revan to war and her ruthless actions meant that she was to be exiled from the Order. She was asked to give up her lightsaber, but she instead stabbed it into the Center Stone out of defiance. Once she had left the Jedi Temple, she went travelling in the Outer Rim, but her adventures there were never documented, and it's unknown what she did during the time period between Revan's conquest of the Republic as a Sith Lord and the beginning of the Dark Wars with the Sith Triumvirate. Once Revan had redeemed himself and destroyed Darth Malak, she was then lured back into the Republic a few years later by Atris as a trap to draw out the Triumvirate. Now from here on, I assume you know the story of Knights of the Old Republic 2, and you know her battle against the Sith Triumvirate. Her story after the game, though, is a lot less conspicuous. If you want to know her story during the game, throw me a comment and I'll be happy to give you some information about it. So Meetra has defeated Darth Traya, the rest of the Sith Triumvirate, and Malachor V has finally been destroyed. She returned to Dantooine to complete her retraining as a Jedi, and it was in this time that T3 told her that he knew what happened to Revan when he left for the unknown regions, but he would only show this information if Bastila Shan was present. So Meetra travelled to Bastila at Coruscant, and T3 showed them a holo recording of Revan. Revan travelled to a planet called Nathema, and he was captured by a red-skinned man who was revealed to be a true Sith, a species long thought dead. In response, they knew Revan had to be rescued. Bastila gave Meetra Revan's mask and asked her to return it to him when he was found. Meetra then set off to Nathema with T3 and the Ebon Hawk to figure out what truly happened. The rest of her companions were left behind, and some of them went on to rebuild the Jedi Order along with Bastila. Meetra landed on Nathema and felt a feeling she had never felt before. Unlike Malachor V, which was a wound in the Force, a place of pain and death, Nathema was just dead. The Force no longer existed on the planet. They had located a derelict government building, and T3 sliced into the mainframe in an attempt to gather information on the planet and potentially Revan's whereabouts. She learned the planet of Nathema was ruled by a man known as Emperor Vitiate after the Great Hyperspace War. Vitiate had gathered all of the remaining Sith Lords to discuss their future, but once the Sith arrived, all life seemed to disappear. A similar feat in which Darth Nihilus had achieved on Kotor. In these records, she also discovered the whereabouts of an ancient Sith colony planet in unknown space called Dromund Kaas, a planet in which Emperor Vitiate was searching for. T3 had managed to find a route to Dromund Kaas, and they landed on the planet with a surprising amount of ease. They had discovered an entire Sith Empire. This was the Sith Empire that her former master Kreia was foreboding about. Once again through T3, she had managed to set up a secret meeting between the Sith that she had seen in the holo recording with Bastila. The meeting began with a fight, and Meetra killed the 4 guards that accompanied the Sith. Despite this, the Sith sat with Meetra, and they discussed the situation at hand. The man revealed himself to be called Lord Scourge, and that his master Darth Nihilus had captured Revan and imprisoned him. He, however, knew the plans to invade the Republic, and he didn't want this, so he formed an alliance with Meetra to free Revan and destroy the Emperor. Scourge had informed Emperor Vitiate that Darth Nihilus was plotting against him, and in the Emperor's rage, he dispatched his elite guard to her compound to execute her. During the chaos, Scourge and Meetra had managed to infiltrate the compound while it was being attacked, and they freed Revan from his cage. Although, when Revan was presented with his mask by Meetra, he crashed to the floor, unconscious. Nyriss, who had managed to survive the guard's attacks, was intending to kill Revan, but she was confronted by the Exile and the Sith. Despite the immeasurable power of the Exile and the Sith, they were nothing compared to a high-ranking member of the Dark Council. But before Nyriss could strike the finishing blow to the pair, Revan stood up, and he obliterated Nyriss using her own powers against her, a skill which he was famous for. Meetra, Revan and Scourge escaped the compound and hid for the next few days. They had learned that the Emperor had declared martial law and executed the entire Dark Council due to Nyriss's betrayal. They then began plotting the attack on the Emperor. The night before the attack, Scourge had a Force vision in which he saw his Jedi allies defeated and laying at the feet of a succeeding Emperor. The next day, the four infiltrated the Imperial Citadel and began the attack on the Emperor's guards. Revan pushed ahead with T3 in order to challenge the Emperor at full strength. Once Meetra and Scourge had defeated the guards, they entered the throne room, only to see Revan at the feet of the Emperor and the scorched parts of what used to be T3 laying on the ground. Vitiate was stood above Revan and prepared to execute him with his own lightsaber. Instead of throwing a lightsaber at the Emperor to kill him, Meetra threw it to deflect the attack and save Revan. At this moment, Lord Scourge had another vision, seeing a Jedi that was neither Revan or Meetra standing proudly above a defeated Vitiate. And knowing that Meetra and Revan would be defeated, he knew what he had to do. In order to convince the Emperor of his loyalties, he betrayed Meetra and impaled her through the back, killing her instantly. The Emperor was thankful for Scourge's actions, and he gave the Sith immortal life, and he also gave him the title of Emperor's Wrath. He also imprisoned what remained of the defeated Revan. Meetra Surik has been killed, but her spirit remained, unable to become one with the Force. She stayed alongside Revan's body in his prison, keeping him sane. She wouldn't resurface for another 300 years when she appeared to the Jedi Council during the Great Galactic War, and she gave them the location of Revan's prison. Once the Jedi managed to free Revan, she appeared to him one last time and convinced him to continue his fight with the Emperor. She then disappeared for the last time, finally becoming one with the Force. There we have it, the life story of the Jedi Exile and her powers. She is one of my favourite Jedi in the history of Star Wars, and I personally didn't like the way her character was treated during her final moments. I think, like Revan, she was capable of a lot more, and the ending of her story was an easy, lazy way of writing out her character for the MMO, The Old Republic. Now don't get me wrong, I enjoyed parts of The Old Republic, I really did. I just felt the characters that had held the franchise up in such high regard were lazily written out and written in the Foundry Shadow of Revan. The book Revan, which is the prequel to The Old Republic, while decent, was a lazy placeholder for the characters, and it's a real shame they never got the conclusions they deserved in the cancelled Knights of the Old Republic 3. If you have a question, or if there's any specific characters you'd like explained in the future, make sure you put something in the comment section below. If you found this video informative, I'd really appreciate it if you could use your Force powers to give this video a like. And most importantly, if you want to see more, be sure to Force choke that subscribe button and support the channel. I'll see you guys soon, and in the meantime, may the Force be with you, always.